It's hard to explain to anyone who didn't live through it what it felt like to slip that white rectangle into your pocket for the first time. The iPod wasn't just a device, it was a feeling, a revolution disguised as a minimalistic block of brushed metal and plastic. You could hold the future in your hand, and for once, it wasn't intimidating, it was personal. Before the iPod, music lived in clutter. Stacks of jewel cases, scratched CDs, half burned discs labeled with Sharpies. If you were lucky, you had a Discman with anti skip, but you still had to choose which album would soundtrack your day. The iPod changed all of that. 1,000 songs in your pocket. That line wasn't marketing, it was liberation. Suddenly, music was mobile, fluid, endless. The click wheel became the new ritual, that tactile circle that scrolled through your soul's library. Every artist, every mood, every memory, all in one place. It wasn't just an MP3 player, it was an identity machine. This is the story of how the iPod didn't just transform how we listen to music, it transformed us. How a small white box bridged the gap between analog nostalgia and digital possibility, and how it rewired the way we felt about art, ownership, and connection. This is the click, the culture, and the revolution of iPod. The year was 2001. The tech world was still spinning from the dot-com collapse, and Apple was fighting to stay relevant. Steve Jobs had returned to the company just a few years prior, bringing the iMac, colorful, transparent, and hopeful. But Apple wasn't a lifestyle brand yet. It was a survivor. MP3s were spreading like wildfire, traded through early file sharing networks like Napster and LimeWire. The world's music was suddenly free and very, very chaotic. Everyone wanted a better way to carry around their collection without lugging around binders of discs. Companies like Creative, Arcos, and Diamond Rio had tried, but their players were clunky, confusing, and cold. Inside Apple's Cupertino walls, a small team led by John Rubinstein and Tony Fadell began sketching something different, a device that wouldn't just store music, it would celebrate it. Jobs wanted simplicity, beauty, and a click that you could feel. He wanted hardware and software to move as one rhythm. When the iPod was unveiled on October 23rd, 2001, not everyone got it. $399 for an MP3 player? Critics scoffed. But for those who touched it, who scrolled through the glowing screen and felt the wheel spin under their thumb, it clicked. Literally and emotionally. Apple wasn't just selling a gadget, they were selling time travel, a portal to your past, your playlists, and your emotions. The iPod wasn't about storage, it was about freedom. The early adopters became evangelists. Those white earbuds weren't just accessories, they were status symbols. You could spot an iPod user from across the street, head bombing, cord bouncing against a hoodie. It said, I'm a part of something new. By 2003, the iPod had become a cultural phenomenon. Apple opened iTunes for Windows, and suddenly, the gate bursts open. Millions of users who once carried Discman and Walkmans now carried a sleek digital library. Mix CDs became playlists. The shuffle button replaced the track skip. The world's soundtrack had gone wireless in spirit, even if not yet in form. Those early iTunes commercials, the silhouetted dancers on neon backdrops, captured more than energy. They captured freedom. It was color and motion and emotion, all at once. Each dancer became every person who'd ever lost themselves in a song. iPod wasn't just an Apple product. It was the first modern accessory. It blurred the line between fashion and technology. It turned minimalism into an aesthetic. People didn't hide their tech anymore. They flaunted it. And at the center of it all was that unmistakable wheel, spinning like a DJ's turntable, letting you control the world at the flick of your thumb. For a generation that lived between mixtapes and MySpace, this wasn't just convenience, it was control. For the first time, your music moved with you. When the iTunes Store launched in 2003, everything changed again. Suddenly, music had a digital home. Legal downloads for 99 cents. Simple, instant, honest. It redefined the relationship between artists and fans. Apple had built the bridge. Every piece fit perfectly. You could buy a song, sync it instantly, and carry it with you everywhere. The phrase sync your iPod became a ritual. People spent hours curating playlists like emotional scrapbooks, study sessions, late drives, breakup mixes. Then came the iPod Mini, the Shuffle, and the Nano, each smaller, sleeker, and more colorful. The iPod was no longer a luxury, it was a lifestyle, a gift, a graduation present, a reward. Celebrities flashed them in interviews. Students clipped them to backpacks. Joggers strapped them to their arms, and musicians even wrote songs about them. Apple had done what no other company could. They made technology human. The iPod wasn't a motion machine wrapped in brushed aluminum. It didn't just store songs, it stored stories. The iPod wasn't just the soundtrack of the 2000s, it embodied the 2000s. By 2006, the iPod had become unstoppable. Over 88 million units sold. Everyone had one, or they wanted one. The sight of that spinning wheel was universal. The fifth generation model introduced video, and suddenly you could carry your favorite TV shows, music videos, and even films. For many, it was the first portable cinema. College students watched The Office between classes. Kids replayed music videos on tiny screens that somehow made the world feel bigger. The white cord had become an equalizer. It didn't matter who you were, rich, poor, student, suit. The moment the earbuds went in, the world disappeared. The bus became your stage. The sidewalk became your runway. Your iPod, your rules. The ad campaign said it best without words. Silhouettes danced, cords swung, colors pulsed. It wasn't about specs or storage anymore. It was all about a vibe. The iPod had turned personal technology into pop culture. But beneath that cultural high note, Apple was already plotting its next act. Because the iPod put music in your pocket, the iPhone was about to put everything else there. The revolution was complete, and now it was time to evolve. When Steve Jobs walked on stage in 2007 and introduced the iPhone, he called it an iPod, a phone, an internet communicator. The audience laughed until they realized he wasn't joking. The iPod, the king of music, had just been absorbed into something much, much bigger. The click wheel, the perfect circle that had defined an era, was suddenly obsolete. The touchscreen was the new language. Tap instead of spin, swipe instead of click. And just like that, the era of white cords began to fade into wireless signals. But for millions, the iPod still held something sacred. It wasn't about connectivity, it was about escape. No notifications, no messages, no pings, just you and your music, a sealed universe. Apple would release a few more models, the Touch, the Classic, the Nano's last hurrah. But the writing was on the wall. The future was app-shaped. The iPod had changed the world, but now the world had changed it. And yet, you couldn't shake the nostalgia. The weight of that cold metal, the glow of that tiny screen, the way the scroll wheel clicked in rhythm with the beat. It wasn't just technology ending, it was an era closing, one thumb scroll at a time. In 2014, Apple quietly discontinued the iPod Classic. No fanfare, no farewell event, just a quiet update on their website. Gone. It felt like losing an old friend, one you hadn't seen in years but always assumed was still around. For many, the iPod represented a simpler kind of connection. Before endless feeds, before algorithms, when music was something you owned, not something you rented. You chose your songs, built your library, and hit shuffle. It was yours. Collectors scrambled to buy out the last remaining units. eBay prices skyrocketed. Some people refused to update, keeping old iPods alive like time capsules. They weren't clinging to tech, they were holding on to a feeling. Apple had evolved. The iPhone, Apple Music, and streaming culture had taken over. But even Apple knew what it owed to that little white box. It was the heartbeat of everything that came after. Every pixel of today's devices, every touch, every stream, every AirPod, traces back to that first click. The sound when that wheel turned. The gateway moment when we stopped carrying music and started carrying memories. When Apple finally ended the iPod line in 2022, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a graduation. The device had fulfilled its purpose. It had taught us how to live with music, not just listen to it. The iPod reshaped entire industries, from record labels to fashion, marketing to design. It made minimal cool again. It turned engineers into artists, and music lovers into curators. But maybe its greatest legacy is invisible. The iPod taught us intimacy with technology. It was the first device that you knew. It held your heartbreak songs, your running playlists, your late night escapes. It understood your silence better than any app ever could. Today, streaming apps have replaced storage. Wireless buds have replaced cords. But somewhere deep down, every playlist we build is still haunted by the ghost of the click wheel. The iPod didn't just play songs, it played back our lives to us. Every track, every shuffle, every tiny screen moment was a reminder that sometimes the smallest device can hold the biggest emotions. If you close your eyes, you can still hear it. That faint mechanical click as your thumb glides around the wheel. You can still see the monochrome screen light up with now playing. You can still feel that sense of control, of calm, and of connection. The iPod was never about music alone. It was about ownership, discovery, identity. It was the moment technology stopped feeling cold and started feeling human. For some, it was a device. For others, it was a diary. For all of us, it was a companion through an era of change. It bridged the world between CDs and streams, between analog warmth and digital clarity. It was where nostalgia learned to sync. And maybe that's why we still miss it. Because the iPod wasn't just built by Apple, it was built by us. By every playlist we made, every track we skipped, every song we played on repeat until the battery died. In a world now filled with endless noise, the iPod remains something rare, the beauty of simplicity. A wheel, a screen, a song, a memory. It didn't just change how we heard music, it changed how we remember it.